on both sides of the riverbank.
Well, I was going to ask in the previous times that Tommy Norris and the Vietnamese commandos went upriver, in what manner did they do that? Were they going by a small boat? Were they walking along the shore?
No, they were walking along the shore. Came very close to running into several patrols. They saw tanks being refueled only maybe 50 yards away. I think that one thing that gave them some cover is that the North Vietnamese almost couldn't conceive of a small unit coming into their territory with that number of troops, present. It would have just been insane. So the benefit of the doubt was, was with them not being there. So they used the cover of night. They used the local ground cover. And when it got too risky, they just came back. And for a while, it looked like they were not going to be able to get Hambleton. He was too far gone. He was too far up the river. And it was hard to get guys to sort of volunteer to do that night after night.
And the other aviation officer they rescued before Hambleton, did they give him anything to wear to conceal him? Is he in his military fatigues? Did they just hope that they wouldn't be spotted at night?
No, they were just using darkness, and they went right down the middle of the river swimming. And most of the troops that they passed, their focus was away from the riverbank. They were on the riverbanks looking out. So they just never conceived of a rescue team coming up the river and grabbing one of their men. But it was a close call, and actually they got back to base, and before they went after Hambleton, there was a rocket attack on their base, and they lost 6 or 7 guys, Vietnamese, and one Marine who was there, sort of a superior to Tommy Norris, got hit above the eye with some shrapnel. So that further sort of dampened the mood. They felt, not only are we not safe up in North Vietnam, we're not even safe in our base, in our bunker. So the tide was kind of turning against this mission. They'd already lost 11 guys. They've had a rocket attack. They've lost a bunch of South Vietnamese. Like, how many lives is this one man worth? And it came pretty close to the mission being over before Tommy Norris and Nine Van Keet went upriver alone.
I guess that shows I'm not a military strategist. I wouldn't have thought of that, but it makes sense that they would practically be hiding in plain sight. Was there idea that, the North Vietnamese are expecting another air rescue attempt? That's what they're looking for. We're going to do the opposite. We're going to do what they couldn't possibly conceive of. Was that the idea, or was there simply no other option?
No, it wasn't. If they didn't use an overland team, there was nothing left they could do. They got the order from the top of the chain of command that no more helicopters were going out. They've lost too many men that way. So even if the North Vietnamese had suspected that they were going to try to go with a manned mission, they had no other choice. And it really came down to the individual bravery of these 2 guys. It was not a mission really where you would expect success. So they just had to go with what they could do. And this idea of, impersonating Vietnam fishermen gave them a little cover, because they felt that if somebody did spot them on the river and saw that they were not fishermen, they could hit the paddles and get downstream a little quicker. So that gave them maybe a little bit of cover, but it was, it was a risky operation.
So from what you read in accounts, as they're going upriver in this canoe, were there any close calls before they reached Hambleton, or was it fairly straightforward going?
No, it was not straightforward at all. There were several things that almost doomed the mission. While they were going upriver, a bank of cloud came over and covered the entire river from bank to bank. So they had no idea really where they were. They had to sort of call their forward air controllers and have them try to spot them and tell them exactly where am I on the river. And the river was cut into different channels. It's not something they realized before they went up it. And so they would go up a channel thinking they were on the main river and find that it ended just in a sandbank. And they had to go back, try another channel, and hope to get lucky. And the third thing that was really holding them back is that Gene Hambleton was almost out of his mind. I mean, he'd been awake and malnourished for almost 12 days, a 52-year-old guy, completely exhausted. He couldn't come down any further, to meet them, which would have made their job easier. And at one point, a forward air controller was above and saw a guy waving a white handkerchief from a sandbar. And he looked down and he realized it was Gene Hambleton in the middle of the day. and he told him, what the hell are you doing? Get back into the foliage. But Gene Hamilton was seeing things. He was hallucinating. He was on the point of mental exhaustion. So they couldn't depend on him to guide them upriver, which made their jobs harder.
So what was it like when they finally came across him?
He was overjoyed. The ironic thing is that he saw Kit first, the Vietnamese commando, and he thought, it's all over. They've got me. But Kit quickly signaled to Tommy Norris, who showed him, I'm an American. I'm a white dude. Don't be afraid. And so Hamilton, he basically started babbling out of complete relief. And they put him in the canoe, put him on the bottom of it, covered him with some reeds, and started stroking downriver. But as they turned one corner and went around a riverbank, they were spotted by a machine gun nest on the opposite bank, and it nearly got them. A few seconds later, had they not been moving so quickly, the machine gun would have spotted them. As it is, it came within a few yards of their boat, so they had to pull to the side of the river, call their forward air controllers, and get a fighter plane attack on the position, which really saved their lives.
Something I forgot to ask, but this is important to the story. When I imagine Tommy Norris going in the boat, you described the fisherman garb and the hat. Sadly, what comes into my mind is Robert Downey Jr. in Tropic Thunder when he has the surgical mask on and everything else. I'm sure that's not correct, so I guess we'll have to correct my false mental image. Does he have any other disguise besides the hat?
No. Luckily, Tommy Norris is a sort of a small dude. He wrestled in high school and college, and back then he weighed about 115. In fact, he almost didn't make it through SEAL school because he was so thin, so small, and they almost washed him out just because they thought that he's not going to be able to carry the weight. But he turned out really to become a Navy SEAL legend, went on to become an FBI legend. He was a member of the original hostage rescue team. So this is a guy who just excelled in adverse circumstances, took on missions that other people didn't want. And he was actually in a later mission in Vietnam, badly wounded, lost one eye, and received the Medal of Honor. The Medal of Honor is for the Hambleton mission, but he really came close to not coming home from Vietnam. And what's ironic about it is that he never felt he deserved the Medal of Honor. He refused it for a while. And the Navy actually got a little mad at him and said, listen, we're going to put you up for it no matter what you think. So you better write your report because we're submitting it. But just an incredibly humble guy who's been focused on national service his whole life.
Yeah, those scrawny guys like Audie Murphy, don't discount him. That's
right.
Maybe what makes him so deadly. Okay, so they are able to get Hamilton. I'm guessing they get him into the canoe. They avoid the machine gun. Yeah, what's the rest of the journey downriver as they're trying to get back into safe territory?
Right. So the machine gun was really the last sort of obstacle. They get to the French bunker, this place they've been using as their sort of base of operations. The other surviving commandos come swarming out. They take him up, take Hamilton out of the canoe, get him inside the bunker, and then there's another rocket attack. So just within minutes, he sort of lucky arrived at the time he did. They get liquids into him, give him a cigarette, put him on an airplane, and his sort of medical odyssey began. He'd lost 40 pounds, and he was not in good shape. I think had he been there another couple of nights, he might have just lapsed into unconsciousness and really sort of faded away. So he was rushed to a hospital, rushed to Saigon, pumped full of liquids, got any meal he wanted. And then he returned to the States as that rare thing, which is a Vietnam hero. There weren't that many heroic stories coming out of Vietnam at the time. And he was a legitimate sort of guy who'd come through really terrible circumstances. So his book became a bestseller. They made the movie about him. But in the back of his mind was always this memory of the 11 guys who didn't come back. And he felt terrible, almost paralyzing guilt about those guys for so many years, and never really got over it.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that there was a lot of debate among the different branches about whether or not the counteroffensive measures should be taken, but those were put on hold for his rescue. Did you see this, any sort of debate or people grumbling a little bit about his hero's welcome that he received?
No, two guys, Jose Astorga and Bill Henderson, were both taken prisoner during the operation, trying to get Hamilton back. They both spent a terrible year in North Vietnamese prisons, experiencing what Henderson described as light torture, but also he lost 35 pounds. He was sealed up in this intensely hot room, which was covered in tile and get up to maybe 120, 125 degrees during the day. He really didn't think he was coming home. But he returned home, became a psychiatrist, now lives retired in Milwaukee. And both him and Astorga said it was worth it. Even the year they spent suffering in those prisons, that they knew that had they gone down, that people were going to come after them. It was just this brotherhood that really went beyond orders and went beyond military culture to something you just owed your brother, owed your fellow soldier. So I didn't experience any of that. I did speak to the son of one of the guys who was killed, and this guy's father was in the original airplane that had been shot down that only Hambleton survived. And he said, just in his his teenage understanding, he kept asking himself, why did you get to come home and my father didn't? But it was really nothing to do with Hamilton himself or the attention he got when he got back home. It was just this idea of the luck of the draw. Why did the SAM missile hit my father's compartment and not yours? Like, what governs that? So I found the families, even the families of the guys who didn't come back, very few of them questioned the mission or the idea that their lives were wasted. That was just not something that they believed in.
And you mentioned earlier why it was so important that Hamilton be rescued, because of his intelligence on radar systems, because of his understanding of avionics. What do you think would have happened if he had been captured?
Well, it's interesting. One thing I found out in the research is that the Soviets actually had teams that went out and scouted for American planes that had gone down, and they often brought the sort of carcasses of crashed planes or crashed cockpits back to Moscow. And like a year or two later, you would see those avionics in new fighter aircraft out of the Soviet Union. So they were actively looking to use the technology that they found on the battlefield in order to better their armaments. That's beyond question. And I think what Hamilton would have given them is not only a better understanding of the radar that was avoiding their SAM missiles. He would have given them an understanding of sort of the deeper strategy of the nuclear missile shield, of what kind of targets the Americans were going after if it came to nuclear war. So that's a much bigger, instead of a tactical advantage, that's a strategic insight that they would not have gotten any other way. So it explains to me the desire of the Pentagon to get him back. But a lot of the guys spoke to me who were on the rescue mission. They said, had this guy been a private, a buck private, no military use whatsoever, we'd have done the exact same thing. It wasn't about his intelligence value. It went way beyond that.
So in talking to the family members of these servicemen who were killed, and then others too who were involved, what did you sense was the significance of this rescue mission beyond just protecting military intelligence?
Well, first I would have to say that this mission took place nearly 50 years ago, and I was speaking to the nephew of one of the helicopter pilots who was killed. And I said, do you think about this mission often? And he said, Steve and I cried about this mission last night. It just never goes away. It's like, the headlines pass, the movies are screened, the books are written, but the families just live with it night after night. I mean, it's a cliche, but when you talk to these families, they really had their lives torn apart and they were never really mended. So for them, it's a continuing tragedy. It's a void in their lives. But I think they still deeply believe in this code of brotherhood that their loved ones were acting under. And they felt, had that not existed, had they left Gene Hambleton behind, to his fate in North Vietnamese prison, the idea of their